Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Taylor had always pictured Italy as a place where beauty could be found around every corner, where history whispered down cobblestone alleyways, where silence could be as powerful as the ringing of cathedral bells. She hoped to find serenity there, an escape from the constant anguish in her chest. What she didn't realize was that her voyage would reveal another layer of sadness, something so unexpected and painful that it would remain with her forever. When she boarded the plane, she assured herself that she was doing the right thing. Los Angeles had becoming intolerable. Every corner of the city, every cafe, and every stretch of coastline held ghosts of memories she couldn't shake. Too many losses, regrets, and betrayals had accumulated on her fragile spirit until she could barely breathe. Italy was meant to be different. She wanted to bury herself in museums, the sound of various languages, and the aroma of cappuccino wafting from tiny cafes. She wanted nothing more than to believe she could feel alive again. The plane landed in Florence on a pale morning, the sky painted with the faintest hint of dawn. Taylor felt her heart relax for the first time in years. She wandered into narrow lanes where laundry fluttered from balconies and the air was heavy with history. She hoped that being here would help her heal. But fate has a nasty way of teaching us lessons, and Taylor's life has always demonstrated that serenity does not last long. On her third day in the city, she stumbled across a square she had never seen before. Children were chasing pigeons beside a fountain, while an elderly guy was playing the violin in the corner. His music shaky yet heartfelt. She paused to listen, closing her eyes as the haunting melodies enveloped her. For a moment, she believed the violin was speaking directly to her damaged spirit. But then the music stopped, and the audience let out a collective gasp. Taylor opened her eyes and turned to face the ruckus at the square's edge. Two people argued beside the fountain. At first, she believed it was simply a normal disagreement. Tourists had tempers, and locals occasionally bristled. It wasn't unusual. But then she noticed the woman's face. She froze. The entire globe tilted. It was a familiar face, one she never expected to see again. Her daughter, the child she had reared, the child she had lost, and the one she thought had died forever. Taylor was immobile for an extended period of time. She couldn't breathe. It felt like time had fractured around her, trapping her between the past and the present. She blinked, convinced it was a figment of her imagination. But no, the curvature of the chin, the black eyes filled with fire, the tilt of the head, they were all identical. That was her. Life. Taylor staggered forward, her hands trembling, but before she could shout out or approach her, the scene shifted into something darker. The man the girl was arguing with abruptly shoved her. It was violent and brutal. The audience yelled out, but no one reacted fast enough. The young woman lurched backward, her foot grabbing the edge of the fountain, and then collapsed. The crack of her body on the stone sounded like thunder. The square was eerily quiet. Taylor's scream ripped through the air. She pushed through the crowd, her heart breaking with each step. She went to her knees next to the girl, her hands quivering as she caressed her face. The young woman's eyes opened briefly, spinning with uncertainty and pain, before closing again. The police arrived. The man was taken away in handcuffs, shouting words Taylor couldn't understand. An ambulance arrived, and the young woman was carefully put onto a stretcher. Taylor stumbled after them, numb, her body moving instinctively. The hours at the hospital seemed to never end. She sat in a rough plastic chair, staring at her hands and unable to keep them from shaking. The sterile smell of antiseptic mingled with memories of her daughter's first scream, steps and grin. She'd lost her before. She could not risk losing her again. Not now. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was somber. He talked in careful English, keeping his voice low. The injuries were severe. There was nothing else they could do. Taylor's world imploded on itself. She followed him into the room, where the girl lay pale and motionless on white blankets. Taylor reached for her hand and gripped it as if she could keep her there, bound. Tears obscured her eyes as she spoke words she'd wanted to say for years. Apologies, admissions, and pledges. She talked about the love that had never died, and the regret that tormented her. She begged for forgiveness, for one more opportunity. The girl's chest lifted and sank slightly, but her eyes never opened again. Hours later, Taylor walked out of the hospital into the chilly Italian night. The city lights shimmered, unconcerned with her sadness. People walked by, smiling and eating gelato, their lives unaffected by her misfortune. She roamed aimlessly through the streets until she reached a bridge over the Arno River. The river reflected the stars, but she found no beauty in it, only emptiness. She leaned on the stone railing, her body quivering from sobbing. How could life be this cruel? How could fate dangle hope in front of her before snatching it away in the most ruthless way possible? She reflected on the trip that had gotten her here, and all of the decisions that had led up to this point. She wondered whether she was cursed, destined to lose everyone she loved. The days that followed blended into one another. She stayed in Italy because she couldn't stand leaving, the prospect of returning to Los Angeles with this new sadness etched on her heart. She went to the small cemetery where they buried the girl. She brought flowers every morning, sat at the grave for hours, and spoke to her as if she could still hear. She told her about the city, the people she saw, and how the light fell on the rooftops at sunset. She told her all she'd never been able to say while alive. Sometimes she believed she saw her in the crowd. A flash of her smile, a glance at her hair, a familiar gesture. But every time she blinked it was gone. Weeks have passed. The violinist was still standing in the square, playing the same melancholy music. Taylor returned there frequently, standing silently at the edge, allowing the music to absorb into her bones. It reminded her of the day everything changed, but it also felt like the only thing keeping her connected to the outside world. She learned, slowly and painfully, that she couldn't avoid grief. Not in Los Angeles, Italy, or anywhere. It left an indelible mark on her insides.
However, she also discovered that love lived there. Even in the face of grief, she never ceased feeling love for her daughter. And, while that love cut like a dagger, it was also what kept her alive. Taylor's stay in Italy lasted longer than she had intended. She no longer considered it a trip. It was an exile, a self-imposed punishment, and a precarious means of living. Every morning, she wandered the cobblestone streets with a sorrowful heart, her eyes looking for something she knew she'd never find. She wore her misery like a shadow, but she also carried a calm power gained from surviving the unspeakable. So, in a city rich in history and beauty, Taylor dealt with her sadness. She spoke to spirits, listened to violins, and stood by the river, contemplating the brutality of fate. She had gone to Italy to escape agony, but instead she had been struck with the most serious wound of them. And yet, even in that wound, there was love, broken, terrible, yet unwavering. Taylor remained while the rest of the world moved on indifferently. A woman with a broken heart, a mother devastated by loss, she went through Florence's narrow streets, carrying the story that no one else could see, a story of hope turned to tragedy, of love that refused to die, and of a horrific incident that would permanently define the rest of her life. 5 words. That was all it needed to break everything. Ridge's normally powerful voice had trembled as he pronounced them. I can't do this again. They weren't loud or nasty, but they stung harder than any argument could. Taylor's heart stopped, and her breath caught in her throat. She'd heard Ridge's misgivings before and lived through his shaky heart, but this time was different. This time, it wasn't just a pause. It was final. The bold and the beautiful has always been a love story intertwined with betrayal, ambition, and second chances. Ridge and Taylor's story was no different. They had seen it all. Marriages, divorces, children, and countless promises broken and redone. Their love was a tapestry built from strands of passion and grief, with each stitch representing what they had struggled for. But now, as Taylor stood in the aftermath of their canceled wedding, She wondered if love was enough to keep them together. It had begun months earlier, when Ridge offered again. The moment was ideal. Sunset on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, waves breaking below like a symphony. He'd grasped her hand, his eyes overflowing with the intensity she'd always desired, and promised her eternity. Taylor had believed him. Despite the scars from their history, she allowed herself to fall back into the idea of a life with Ridge. She disregarded the whispers in her mind that reminded her of Ridge's other great love, Brooke Logan, who always seemed to lurk in the background of their relationship.
Brooke.
Taylor felt uneasy just hearing the name. For years, she'd fought Brooke for Ridge's affection, a competition that had defined much of her life. They'd swapped insults, tears, and surprising realizations, but the competition never fully ceased. Even today, with Brooke married to someone else, her presence was palpable. Taylor assured herself that this time would be different. Ridge had chosen her. He stared into her eyes and swore Brooke was from the past. But as the wedding preparations continued, Taylor couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Ridge had been aloof in the weeks before the wedding. He'd immersed himself into his work at Forrester Creations, staying late at the office and filling his phone with messages he didn't want to share. Taylor attempted to dismiss it as stress. After all, the fashion house was in the midst of a major collection release. The way Ridge's smile faltered when she addressed their future, the way he avoided talking about the honeymoon, and the way his eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her were all things that bothered her. The night before the wedding, Taylor confronted him. They were standing in the same room where the ceremony was meant to take place, surrounded by half-decorated arches and scattered petals. She'd questioned him directly whether he was having second thoughts. Ridge had hesitated for a heartbeat too long before assuring her that everything was okay. "I love you, Doc," he added, using the nickname that used to make her heart skip a beat. Taylor became increasingly uneasy as his voice lacked conviction. The morning of the wedding was bright and clear, but by midday, the dream was unraveling. Guests began to arrive, and the mansion was filled with laughing and chatter. Taylor was in her dressing room, her hair in an elegant updo and her makeup faultless, despite the tears she'd pushed back. Ridge knocked on the door just as she was changing into her gown. His face was pallid and his mouth stiff. He didn't need to say much to make her realize anything was wrong. "Taylor, we need to talk," he continued, his voice barely audible. She had followed him into the main room, her heart hammering. The visitors were hustled out, the music stopped, and the atmosphere became tense. That's when he said it. "I can't do this again." 5 words reverberated in her head, each one a blow to the life she'd planned. "Why?" Taylor managed to inquire, her voice breaking. "What has changed, Ridge?" He looked aside, his hands deep in his pockets. "It's not you," he replied, the cliché hitting harder than she expected. "It's me. I thought I could proceed, but I'm not sure I'm prepared for this. For us." Taylor's mind raced. Was this Brooke? Had she wormed her way back into Ridge's heart, like she always did? Or was it something else, a dread or doubt Ridge couldn't express? She wanted to scream and demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, the weight of his words weighing against her. The hours that followed were blurred. The guests were sent home with mumbled apologies. The caterers packed their trays, the florists collected their arrangements, and the mansion emptied, leaving just Taylor and Ridge in its hollow grandeur. She had removed the ring and placed it on the table between them, a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was complete. But the narrative did not stop there. Taylor couldn't simply walk away, not after what they'd been through. She needed to know why Ridge had backed away, why he'd let their love slide through his fingers again. She spent the next few days in a fog, repeating their discussion, analyzing every word and glance. She contacted her children, Steffi and Thomas, who were furious with their father, but encouraged her to go on. "You deserve better, Mom," Steffi murmured, her voice stern and protective. But Taylor was not ready to let go. She confronted Ridge again, but this time at Forrester Creations. The office was silent, with no hum of sewing machines or chatter in the late evening. Ridge sat at his desk, sketches all around him, his face etched with tiredness. Taylor didn't bother with politeness. "Tell me the truth, Ridge," she murmured calmly, despite the fury inside her. "Is it about Brooke?" He flinched, which was all the response she needed. "It's not what you think," he responded swiftly. "Brooke and I are not together. But I saw her last week and we spoke. About us and the history." Taylor's heart sunk as it dredged up things he had thought were buried. She'd always felt Brooke was a ghost in their relationship, but seeing it verified was a fresh hurt. "So you're still in love with her," she stated, rather than asking a question. Ridge shook his head, but his gaze betrayed him. "I don't know what I feel," he said. "I love you, Taylor. I do. But I can't keep hurting you, and I can't keep pretending I'm fine when I'm not." The candor was painful, but it was also a source of relief. Taylor had struggled for years to be Ridge's one and only, proving that she was enough. But now she realized the truth. Ridge's heart was a battlefield, torn between two women and two lives, and he might never find peace. She couldn't continue battling for a man who couldn't decide. In the days that followed, Taylor started to rebuild. She relied on her friends, including Dr. Grace Buckingham, who reminded her of her strength as both a psychiatrist and a woman. She put herself into her work, guiding her patients through their own pain while silently tending to her own. She spent time with her grandchildren, whose laughter soothed her broken soul. And, gradually, she began to envisage a future without Ridge, a future in which she was not defined by his love or indecision. But the ache persisted. Taylor would sit by her window late at night, when the world was silent, with the ring she had returned to Ridge fresh in her mind. She'd think about those 5 devastating words and the man who had said them. She didn't hate Ridge, she couldn't. He was an integral part of her life. But she realized she had to let him go, not for his sake, but for her own. The Bold and the Beautiful was about love's triumphs and tragedies, and Taylor Hayes was no stranger to them. She had lost Ridge before, but she had survived. This time, however, she was not simply existing, she was selecting herself. And in that decision, she discovered a glimmer of hope, a promise that heartbreak was not the end, but rather a fresh beginning. As the weeks evolved into months, Taylor began to rediscover the woman she was before Ridge, before the never-ending cycle of love and grief. She traveled, catching up with old acquaintances and meeting new ones. She created a book about perseverance and healing based on her personal experiences. And she chuckled, finding joy in moments she had previously neglected. The Forrester estate, once a source of hope and anguish, had faded into the background of her existence. Ridge, too, had his own reckoning. Without Taylor to keep him grounded, he was forced to confront the chaos in his emotions. He and Brooke circled each other, their shared history drawing them together while also pushing them apart. But it was their narrative, not Taylor's. She had crafted her own conclusion, in which she was the hero rather than the devastated. And so the drama went, as it usually did in The Bold and the Beautiful. Taylor Hayes had experienced love, grief, and the fortitude to start over, and she was stronger as a result. The 5 words that had broken her heart served as a catalyst for her rebirth, reminding her that even in the darkest pain, there was a route to healing, hope, and a life beyond the wreckage of a canceled wedding.